First and foremost, thank you all for joining. Thank you to the panelists for being here. I think we have a really exciting topic on the agenda for today. I'm really excited to get into it a little bit. First off, if you're joining, as a participant, feel free to write in the chat where you're coming from, which organization you're working for, so on. And there's a couple housekeeping items. If you want to ask a question, I think you can either do it in the chat or via the Q&A function, which if you go to the bottom of the screen and you click Q&A, you can ask a question there, and the panelists are also welcome to answer questions in writing directed to them, or we can bring it up in the conversation. So without further ado, let's get started. So we've organized this event because we've been working on how there are some very serious weaknesses in how climate adaptation finance is being moved and whether it's working. So there are nevertheless very strong initiatives to better track finance, and I think it's something that's appearing on the agenda of climate and development practitioners more and more, and making sure that it works locally. So this integrity talk will highlight, maybe some of the challenges, but also what governments and funders and CSOs and communities can do to actually ensure that funds reach those who need them most and achieve their intended objectives. And how can we deliver also on water and sanitation objectives in relation to climate change? So we're going to start the discussion with a keynote presentation. This event is also co-hosted by GIZ, which is really great. It's happy to be able to work on this topic together a little bit. So we're going to start with a keynote presentation from Martin Dersch at GIZ. Martin's going to give a bit of a overview of the situation. And Martin is an advisor on water and climate within the sector network water and sanitation policy innovations for resilience called InnoBlue at the GIZ. He holds a background in applied and environmental geoscience with a specialization in hydrogeology, and he brings field experience from projects on integrated water resource management and climate adaptation in Tunisia and Vietnam. So I'm going to pass over first to Martin to set the scene for us a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rebecca. Also to Win for the possibility for us to host this event together. Looking very much forward to the discussion. Yes, I'll be setting the scene a bit with the presentation. Hoping it's going to be shared. Perfect. So yeah, let me set the scene a bit on the topic on climate finance transparency for this integrity talk that we're having today. And I'll directly start, click please, with the question, what is climate finance? So the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, say that climate finance refers to local, national, or transnational financing, drawn from public, private, and alternative sources of financing that seeks to support mitigation and adaptation actions that will address climate change, which is already in itself a very big sentence. So let's dissect it a bit. Basically says that climate finance is an important aspect to address climate change. I mean, climate change, as we all know, is causing higher temperatures, more extreme weather events, and serious impacts on ecosystems, human health, and livelihoods, especially for the most vulnerable groups. Click, please. But despite the urgency, current efforts that address climate change fall short, mainly because there is not enough funding. Because addressing climate change and adapting to its impacts require substantial flows of climate finance and investment. However, there's already a big but. There is no single and universal definition of what constitutes as climate finance and the methods that can be used to track the climate finance flows. So the big question will be what counts as climate finance versus other sector finance? How do we quantify and how do we monitor it? And for what should it be spent? Given that the definition we already heard involves mitigation and adaptation, reducing vulnerability and increasing resilience on local, national, and transnational level, we can see there's a huge range of possibilities we can use these funds on to combat climate change. Click, please. So let me focus a bit on the example of adaptation. Why is already the topic of adaptation so complex and challenging? Well, first of all, as we already heard, climate change is impeding and affecting us all in a lot of different situations and sectors. So many different sectors are affected by climate change and are also affecting it. So we've got the energy sector, we've got the water sector, we've got the agriculture and the biodiversity sectors, we got land and soil, we also got industries. Also between all of these that I named plus a lot more that I didn't name yet, we have interdependencies and cascading risks. So all of this is intrinsically linked together and all is accelerated by the effects of climate change. Furthermore, we are looking at mismatched time cycles or time scales. So we have political cycles, elections and re-elections in countries and governments. We have the runtime of projects itself for climate adaptation. We have large-scale infrastructure projects that often take a long time, widely exceeding the political cycles or project runtimes that I just mentioned. And obviously, we also have the climate itself. So global climate is changing gradually, constantly, and all of these timescales are not matching together. So we need to build for a range of possible futures. As also all the climate predictions that we have are predictions and are there are varying amount, varying goals. I'd say, sorry for that. And all in all, that leads to the success of measuring isn't always straightforward because it's not a straight line, project to success, because there are so many different factors involved in it and also being involved by it. Click, please. So why is climate finance so vulnerable to integrity risks? Well, I already talked about and we already heard about the difficulty and ambiguity of defining what actually counts as climate finance and the broad spectrum it can be implemented in and the insecurities. On top of that, now we have the so-called race for adaptation finance. So on one hand, the financial flows are not sufficient to address and combat climate change properly. But on the other hand, these flows have very high volumes of capital that often need to be deployed quickly due to the urgency of the situation. My video just got, there I am again. On the other hand, we have high volumes of capital that need to be deployed quickly due to the urgency of the matter and also due to, for example, political pressures. We have the competing interests and tensions of equity between the sectors that I already mentioned. So according to the Global Landscape on Climate Finance report, over 50% of global climate financing went to the energy sector. So as you can see, the situation already hints at a heightened risk for corruption. Furthermore, we have in climate adaptation, the money flows through long and opaque chains with sometimes many actors involved. So the procurement of services and materials. We have the aforementioned ambiguity around what counts as climate finance. And very often we see the exclusion of stakeholders, for example, indigenous communities in the planning and the decision planning. Click, please. This all is now meeting institutions that are not prepared for this kind of financial oversight or that do not have the accountability infrastructure in place. We have outputs and results of projects that can be hard to define and ultimately hard to verify their success, as we also see weak requirements around transparency and reporting, as well as the low capacity for proper monitoring of those financial flows and also of project results. Click, please. So what can be the consequences of all of this and why is integrity so important? Well, Transparency International said corruption has been the catalyst for human rights abuses, worsening water and air quality, undermining the just transition when communities were harmed by a corrupted project, weakening democratic processes, destroying the level playing field for business seeking contracts, and causing widespread destruction of ecosystems and biodiversity. And this is a very important consequence, or a lot of important consequences that we have to keep in mind, because, click please. Corruption cannot only lead to adaptation, climate and adaptation projects to only fail, but it can actually lead to maladaptation. Maladaptation is defined by the IPCC as actions that may lead to increased risk of adverse climate-related outcomes, increased vulnerability to climate change, more inequitable outcomes, or diminished welfare now or in the future. So maladaptation is actually making things worse. It can lead to human rights abuses, which are an especially horrendous outcome of corrupted climate initiatives. However, if we talk about combating climate change together, the respect for human rights is essential. To make matters even worse, many climate-related initiatives are located in or near communities that are already marginalized or were historically mistreated for generations. For example, indigenous peoples in the world. Click, please. So why is integrity important? Integrity is essential because climate adaptation projects directly affect people's livelihoods, water and food security, and resilience. We needed to ensure climate finance actually addresses vulnerability. So climate finance should strengthen resilience to droughts, floods, and other climate impacts. We needed to avoid before mentioned maladaptation, because when integrity is weak, adaptation projects may produce unintended negative impacts. For example, poorly planned infrastructure that can increase vulnerability rather than strengthen resilience. We needed to protect vulnerable communities, as corruption or poor governance often diverts resources away from those that need them the most. And we need to build the trust in climate finance with transparent and accountable systems that help maintain the public trust. This means that we need to have climate funds that are used honestly and efficiently. We need decisions that are transparent and accountable, communities that can actually participate in the planning and monitoring, the projects that deliver real adaptation benefits that are measurable, and resources that reach the most vulnerable to climate impacts. Click, please. So now the question, why is this so important for a development partner, a development organization like us, like GIZ? One big, or like the main point, is the massive damage to reputation and the concept of development cooperation that it can cause. So, for example, in the case of GIZ, our financing is mainly financed by German taxpayer money that's provided by the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. So, if due to corruption or we have a case of maladaptation, it's not just a reputational damage to us as an implementing partner, but a reputational damage to the whole concept of development cooperation in general in the eyes of the German public. So the question, why should German taxpayer money be used to fund corruption anywhere else? But also in the eyes of the affected country, that German cooperation is part of corruption. These negative consequences can then ripple across all sectors and across the whole development cooperation, especially in our modern time where development cooperation is already heavily under attack and asked for its cents and has seen massive cuts, e.g. from USAID as an example. This is a very important thing. Click, please. So what can we do? Well, one big thing I think that I mentioned is we need capacity building. So we need strong partner governments and institutions. We need to involve technical and legal experts in contract negotiations. There needs to be a strong involvement of the public sector and marginalized groups, planning and supervisor authorities, and independent monitoring and evaluation authorities. We need codes of ethics, so rules of management if there's a conflict of interest, in particularly the duty of disclosure of those conflicts. And in general, increasing transparency in tendering processes and the public access to information. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so this was just a broad setting the scene. I hope I was still on time, and I'll give back to you.
You were perfect. 10 minutes on the dot. So thanks a lot, Martin. Yeah, I mean, I like two things that you mentioned. One, this Transparency International quote of, the role that corruption is playing in all of this, not only for creating the situation, but exacerbating the situation. So I think it demonstrates how high the stakes are. I think also this trust in development, this trust in the institutions that are trying to change the situation, and how high the stakes are in terms of reputation and the ability to deliver on these things that development promises is also a really important element to consider in all of this. And yeah, again, the stakes are very high. So thanks again for setting that scene. We're going to move now to Karen. Karen is head of the Independent Integrity Unit of the Green Climate Fund, which is, if you don't know, the world's largest multilateral climate fund. Previously, she has held integrity leadership positions with organizations such as SOS Children's Villages International. So Karen is going to talk a little bit about this perspective from the funders' perspective. So what is it that funders can do? What is it that how is the GCF approaching some of these challenges? So we'll start with short presentations to get the ball rolling a little bit, but questions will come. And at any point, if you have questions for the panelists, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A function. And Karen's gonna give us a little bit of information now on the GCF approach. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Rebecca. If you could start sharing just the first slide before I get into my presentation, I will give a bit of overview of the GCF. So first of all, I would like to thank you and your colleagues, Win, for having me. It's a great pleasure to take part in this panel and to talk also a little bit about how the GCF approaches integrity. And I think it sets, Martin has set very well the scene, and I was taking also notes in some of the aspects that I also will cover. I will try to keep it short, but definitely I totally agree with many of the aspects that he said, and this is what we are also seeing at the GCF. So, as Rebecca already mentioned at the beginning about my introduction, the GCF is the world's climate fund for developing countries. We are mobilizing finance at scale. We strengthen national and regional institutions, and we try to connect global partners to drive the transformation and the necessary climate-led or the country-led climate actions. The fund is designated as an operating entity under the UN Climate Framework Convention on Climate Change, and we are accountable and function under the guidance of the Conference of the Parties of the Convention. One of our core principles that we follow, but it's also a challenge also related to integrity, is we follow a country-driven approach, and that means that developing countries lead the GCF programming and implementation. And how we do this, we operate nowadays through a network of over 200 accredited entities and delivery partners. So you can see we have a very big network of entities worldwide, and we work directly with us in developing countries for the project design and implementation. And our partners include not only international in entities, but also national commercial banks, multilateral, regional, and national development finance institutions, equity funds institutions, also United Nations agencies and other civil society organizations. So there you can already get a glimpse that despite this is a very ambitious mission that the fund is driving, but that can also bear quite a number of risks. The fund is governed and supervised by a board that is charged with the governance and oversight of the fund's management and of all of its financial resources. Also, the fund or the board also approves all the funding proposals that are eventually funded. Currently, the board has the board by its governing instrument has 24 members, composed of an equal number of members from developing countries and developed country parties. We have the representatives of the parties are those of the United Nations regional groupings and representatives from small island developing states, what we call the SIDS, and also the least developed countries, the LDCs. If you go to the next slide, just to give you an overview of the actual risks, is to give you an understanding of what the fund is facing. So the fund, on the one hand, is very proud of having an expanding portfolio. There is climate change is happening. I think every one of us, wherever we are, can really feel it. And that means for the fund, we also have an expanding portfolio of projects and also an expanded portfolio of accredited entities. If you look at the right side, we started in 2015 with our very first tranche action, and in the number of projects in that year were 7. If we go to the end of 2025, we have by now 296 projects approved. And if you go to the graph on the left side, you see the amount of funding that has been approved, and we are now in 2025. We have a 16.7 billion, and the number is growing. That is a very good result for the fund, but for any integrity function, any accountability function, that also means there is an expanding risk we have more risk, and it means more work also for the accountability mechanisms. And you see that here in the acronym I use. These are the independent units of the fund. If you go to the next slide, please. When it comes to risks, we are not only always talking about fraud and corruption and so forth. We are also aware that there are other risks that counter climate action. And I will just name here a few: the inequitable power, the capture of resources and power, political agendas worldwide, can be anywhere, exclusion of vulnerable groups from decision-making. And we are all aware, not only at the GCF, but in many organizations, we are aware that also these risks, they worsen the climate impacts on the vulnerable communities that we serve, also at the GCF with our projects. If you go to the next slide, I tend really to say corruption, fraud and corruption, the face of corruption is the same everywhere in the world. Corruption in climate finance does not look different than in other contexts. What makes it worse is the accelerating element of climate change. And for that, it's really important to understand corruption and its role in exacerbating climate change. So there is, first of all, the erosion of trust. Corruption diminishes trust in institutions and hinders collaborative effort to address climate change. There's a misallocation of resources. Corruption, as we have learned, leads to inefficient allocation of resources, impacting climate change mitigation efforts. So Martin was just also talking about adaptation efforts, but it's also about mitigation efforts. Then delay of action, corruption can delay implementation of essential climate change initiatives, prolonging environmental harm, and also then again exacerbating the climate change. These are the risks that we need to be aware of. And now, where does this leave the independent integrity unit of the GCF? And that's where our role comes in. If you go to the next slide. So the IIU, or as we call the Independent Integrity Unit, IIU, is one of the accountability mechanisms of the Green Climate Fund. So when Martin was just talking about that, accountability is an issue for many organizations. The fund has actually, from its outset, thought about incorporating accountability as 3 independent mechanisms in its governing instruments. I think it is because also the fund knew from the outset that, yes, while it's on the one hand, it is important to fund climate change action, and for that, the secretariat of the fund is responsible. It was equally important not only to safeguard the funds that the fund is putting into this climate action and the project, but also really to make sure that every dollar of this project counts, and that we serve really the beneficiary of these projects, or how it's also called, and I think also Martin mentioned that term, these vulnerable communities. So on the one hand, yes, it is the money comes from mostly the public sector. So we are talking about really governments from the developed countries, so the donor countries. But we are also have to ensure accountability towards the vulnerable communities. In this respect, the mandate of the Independent Integrity Unit is foremost to investigate allegations of fraud and corruption. And then it's also nowadays, so this is on the one hand, this is the sort of the reactive approach, if you want, investigation of allegations of fraud and corruption. Another very important part of us is that we recommend improvements, and we also draft and prepare so-called integrity policies and controls in order to mitigate integrity violations in the fund's activities, and to really make sure that all our stakeholders adhere to the highest standards of integrity. If you go to the next slide, you see our key responsibilities that we have in the IAU. So foremost, investigate allegations of integrity violations. We are sort of book captains or owners of a suite of integrity policies that the fund has, or the board has adopted for the fund. We have a number. We have policies on prohibited practices. We have a policy on money laundering and anti-money laundering and countering finance terrorism. Of course, also a policy on the protection of whistleblowers and witnesses and so forth. Another very important part of the IAU and for the fund is not only acting reactively to suspected cases of fraud, but also to proactively assess the risks in projects that we see. And we try to do that through rather innovative elements, through artificial intelligence and machine learning. Then another very important element is really the capacity building, integrity capacity building across this vast network of over 200 accredited entities and delivery partners, making sure that they understand the fund's obligation and also principle of integrity in all activities that they do in support of climate change mitigation or adaptation. And then, of course, it's also collaboration with peer integrity office. And Win would be one of them. Whoever works in this field, and I and my colleagues, we strongly believe in integrity is a collective effort. And it's a continuous collective effort that we all need to work on, really. This is what my call to all of you and also in the audience is. We cannot do this. We cannot do this alone. In order to ensure that the money, that every dollar spent on climate change action reaches the vulnerable community, we have to put these accountability mechanisms and our work in place together. That brings me to my last slide. Just to give you a little bit of info, we have got a number of resources. If you visit our website, you can see what we do. We have a lot of capacity building material also already out there, and we are regularly developing this on a continuous basis. If you want to report something to the IAU, an allegation of fraud and corruption, you have multiple ways of doing this, and this is shown on the right side of this slide. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Karen. That was great. I love the message that you're ending on is that we need to come together. We need to share experiences. We need to have more events like this. We need to have more opportunities to understand where we can do better. I think it's great. It was also pretty striking to see your first graph of where the GCF was in 2015 and where it is today. And we're always talking about how much more money actually is going to climate action, and to see that visually demonstrated was pretty striking. So. Yeah, thanks a lot. We're going to move now to, what does this mean for water and sanitation a little bit more specifically? We're going to move to Ramon's presentation. So if you've been following the news a little bit, you may have seen something that happened in the Philippines over the last couple of years. It was a big corruption scandal in flood infrastructure projects. So Ramon's going to speak a little bit more to what happened there, why it happened. Many questions. We'll start with an introduction, but we can get into it in the discussion as well. And Ramon is a recognized water sector leader with over 3 decades of experience in water resources management, utility regulation, and water governance. He currently serves as the chairman of Future Water Asia, chairman of Better with Water Philippines, a social enterprise, and as a senior water advisor to the Asian Development Bank. He's also a member of the advisory council of Imagine H2O Asia. And formerly, he served as the executive director of the National Water Resources Board and chairman of the Metropolitan Water Works and Sewerage System in Manila. So throughout his career, he has championed policy reform, water security, climate resilience, improved access to water and sanitation, pretty much, across the board, lots of work there. And today he continues to work with governments, utilities, development institutions, and the private sector to advance sustainable and equitable water solutions across the Philippines and the Asia-Pacific region. So Ramon, over to you. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much. So I guess we're the case study on corruption right now. So I'll start with a story. I'm sure some of you have heard about it. So two ministers visit each other's homes. The first home is owned by the finance minister, and it's huge. It's well appointed. It's grand. And the public works minister asks how he was able to afford it. The finance minister points to a distant bridge and says 20% went to me. A year later, the finance minister goes to the public works well, even bigger home and points and asks how he was able to afford it. And the public work minister points to a river and says, see that bridge? And the finance minister squints, what bridge? 100% goes to me. So that joke, which is familiar among many countries, describes, unfortunately, with precision what's actually happened in the Philippines. Now, the Philippines is the world's most disaster-prone country, and flooding is its most persistent and deadly hazard. It's important to state clearly, flooding is not only a disaster risk problem, it's also a water security problem. So when flood control fails, drinking water sources are contaminated and communities lose safe water access for days or even weeks. Flood control and water supply are then two phases of the same vulnerability. Between 2022 and 2025, the government allocated approximately $11 billion for flood control alone. But if we go back further, since 2011, the total exceeds $25 billion. So the scandal, what happened in the Philippines, centers on ghost projects. Basically, it's our infrastructure paid for in full from public funds, but never actually built. Senate investigators found hundreds of such projects spanning nearly a decade. So if a 6% ghost project rate holds across the full portfolio of 30,000 flood control projects in the country, the amount stolen could reach about $3 billion. Before even counting losses from other projects of substandard construction. So two mechanisms enable this. First, budget manipulation. The Philippine Congress uses a closed-door reconciliation process where lawmakers can insert projects, a practice locally known as pork barrel, meaning discretionary funds directed to favored contractors in exchange for kickbacks, with lawmakers pocketing 30 to 40% of project costs. Second, there's a rigged procurement system of more than 2,400 accredited contractors. Only 15 contractors received about $1.6 billion, or about 20% of the entire budget. 5 firms had projects in nearly every region of the country. For this audience, one point is critical. The same budget processes, contractor networks, and procurement vulnerabilities that enable these ghost flood control projects also govern water supply and sanitation infrastructure across the country. So this is not a story confined to only one program. Now, the exposure actually only happened by accident. In his 2024 State of the Nation address, the president boasted the completion of 5,000 flood control projects. But it so happened that severe flooding struck immediately after that speech and cast doubt on the claims of the president. By 2025, the Senate hearings and citizen complaints had revealed duplicated project descriptions, communities that had never seen a cement block. Despite official completion records, mass protests erupted now around the capital. The government responded, the Public Works Secretary resigned, an independent commission was established, and over 1,000 accounts were frozen by the Anti-Money Laundering Council, with asset freezes reaching about $3 billion. So between 2022 and 2026, an estimated 900 to 1,000 people died in the Philippines from floods, landslides, and related storm events. Many of those deaths occurred in communities where flood control infrastructure had been paid for, approved, and recorded as complete. So this is not simply individuals stealing money. It was systematic failure. The very processes designed to ensure accountability, which were procurement, auditing, project verification, were all captured. The Philippines has committed to universal water and sanitation under the SDG 6 by 2030, but it's facing a financing gap of nearly 1 trillion pesos or almost $20 billion. And corruption at this scale does not merely delay that goal, it makes it structurally unreachable. So the failure of flood control is not just fiscal waste, it is fatal to many people. So prosecutions right now are accelerating. Plunder and graft charges have been filed against former legislators and senior public works officials. Several are now in detention or barred from leaving the country. Some have left the country. And one key figure still remains abroad. We suspect he's somewhere in Portugal. More than 60 contractors have faced blacklisting. And the OECD just cited the Philippines earlier this month as a case study in procurement vulnerability. So what the network, I think, can draw from this, we have 3 recommendations. First, procurement transparency must be structurally enforced, not left to administrative discretion. This applies also to water supply and sanitation projects, which carry the same vulnerabilities but attract far less scrutiny than high visibility flood works. Second, physical verification must be routine and not reactive. The scandal persisted because no systematic inspection confirmed whether projects existed. Community monitoring, satellite verification, and third-party audits must be standard practice for all water infrastructure. And third, the political economy cannot be ignored. Infrastructure integrity is impossible when those who approve budgets also direct contracts. Separating political discretion from technical procurement and making these decisions publicly traceable is the reform that outlasts any single investigation. Water integrity organizations like this network exist precisely because the water sector is uniquely vulnerable to capture. Water infrastructure is technically complex, geographically dispersed, and hard for citizens to inspect. These are characteristics that make it an attractive target for corruption, and that makes this network's work more urgent than ever. The challenge before us is not only to punish those who stole, it's to build systems that make the next theft impossible. The question is not whether such a corruption can happen, it's whether we have the will and the way to prevent it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ramon. That was, it's kind of amazing to see, we talk often about these very classic integrity risks that can happen, in the water sector, but of course also beyond, procurement, ghost contracts, networks of contractors who are colluding with politicians to give kickbacks. It's really amazing to see how many of these classic poor integrity manifestations of poor integrity are in this case. So it's a very tragic case, it's a very sad case, but it's also very illuminating in terms of the effects not only on water and sanitation,
1,000 deaths.
On people's lives.
1,000 deaths from corruption, easy.
To adapt, it's really crazy. So thank you so much for setting the scene, for giving some very clear, very illuminating information on why it came to be. We're going to move now to back a little bit to where can we have impact? In particular, where can national governments improve what they're doing to improve the integrity situation? So I'm going to pass now to Faith Ngige. She's the national coordinator of the Kenya Platform for Climate Governance. So she's a climate governance and green economy practitioner with strong experience in locally led climate action, climate finance accountability, circular economy, just transition, and community-centered advocacy. So Faith works closely with civil society, with county actors in Kenya, with communities, and also with national policy processes to strengthen public participation, transparency, and inclusion in climate action. So for this webinar, she's bringing some practical insights from Kenya's devolved governance system, especially on how national and county governments or sub-regional governments can improve climate finance tracking, accountability, and delivery to communities. So over to you, Faith. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you, Rebecca. Just give me a minute. I share my screen. So I'll be sharing about what national governments can do and the linkages on the devolved system, especially from Kenya, because Kenya is implementing a very special climate finance program or project in the country since the year 2018, and there are lessons that are evolving as we implement the project. Not to repeat a lot, my organization is Kenya Platform for Climate Governance. We are a CSO, a civil society-based organization in Kenya that is of national in nature. And for that reason, then I'll be sharing a lot of perspectives from the communities and the civil society and what is our role in enhancing integrity and transparency in matters of climate finance. Just to give us a background, Kenya has been implementing and is still implementing what is known as Financing Locally Led Climate Action, FLOCA in short. And this project has been with us since the year 2018 up to now, but the investments at the community level started 2 financial years ago. So far, the money that has been received is largely a World Bank. The World Bank manages the fund, and we also have a portion of it that is funded directly by World Bank as a loan. So the concessional funding window so far as at now is around 83.17% that has been disbursed into the program that runs across the country. And then we have the trust fund that has now been disbursed to around at 90%. So you can imagine all this money is already in Kenya's economy flowing through the system. Looking at the last financial year, which you're ending this June on the 30th, the money that has been disbursed to the counties is around 11 billion, 9.4 billion from the World Bank kitty, and then the 1.6 billion from the KfW. KfW is an agriculture ring-fenced fund funded by Germany. So far this money has been implemented in 45 counties. This project, 42 counties have met the minimum performance conditions for the second cycle of this particular financial year. And we have around 1,238 wards that are benefited out of 1,500. It's expected that then how the project was designed and where we are at the moment, we've kind of surpassed the wards by about 700 wards. Where is this money going? Largely, the large amount of FLOCA funds have ended up funding water projects. That is water security in terms of boreholes, water supply, water pumps, and storage at 48.3. We have environmental and ecosystem projects at 17.5. We have agriculture and livelihoods at 14.3. Then energy and low carbon solutions at 14.5%. The climate resilient infrastructure has just to do with drainage, culverts, and flood control, protective works at around 5.2, and then we have cross-cutting at 0.3. So we can see the country says, or the country is demonstrating that water is the biggest need as far as climate change is concerned within the country. So to ensure transparency, the FLOCA structure is a bit complex. In that I'll just go to the next slide and be able to show the money comes from the National Treasury. From the World Bank, it is the National Treasury. Then the National Treasury will disperse these funds through the public system and the public budgeting process to the county governments. Then the county governments will disperse this money to the ward level, and it's expected that then the money gets to the community projects. So that is the plan of how the institutional framework around it actually should be. But the money is following that system, and I like what Martin said at the beginning. The political cycles, the budgeting cycles also impacts how this money is actually flowing. There are institutions that are put in place to look at the accountability elements. That the National Treasury looks at the counties as far as their performance is concerned and conducts what we call an annual performance assessment that determines if the county is going to receive funds in the second funds for the next financial year. So we have a performance-based assessment conducted by the National Treasury. We have the controller of budget who is active during the budgeting process because this money flows through the public funds system, the budgeting process at the counties and at the national level. We also have the Auditor General who performs independent oversight over the spending of these climate funds, looking at matters of procurement, value for money, and project delivery. I am not sure if they are able to determine the resilience outcomes that were achieved, because I think we still are grappling with what are the resilience indicators for the project. And then we have the ESCC, that is the Ethics and Integrity Commission, who works as part of project implementers to look and prevent and detect and also respond to corruption risks, as well as to address grievances that come around during the project implementation period. We conducted a study a year ago, and we released studies and we released findings. Public participation is still not at par. There's still weakness in public participation, just understanding the difference between a climate fund that is flowing through the budget system of the government and delineating it with the overall development funds that are meant to deliver services to the citizens. And then the information around, especially around financing and how it flows, is still not very clear to many. Inflated project costs, projects that are incomplete in some counties, delayed reporting, and also conflict of interest are some of the things that are red flags to watch, especially when implementing at the county level. How does accountability actually look like? I've mentioned the role of the national government entities up there, the Treasury, Control of Budget, Auditor General, and the Ethics and Corruption Commission. Then at the county level, the subnational level, we have the County Assembly who approves budgets and also is engaged in public hearing. We have the County Treasury who are also responsible for the budgeting and procurement through the IFMI system. We have the County Climate Change Unit, which coordinates the implementation of the projects as well as the technical elements of the project implementation. The county departmental units that are involved, just like we said, if you have water, then you have a Department of Water. Agriculture, there's the Department of Agriculture. Energy, there's the ministry that deals with energy. So those sectoral units are also part and parcel of the process. And then we have the internal audit committee that should be responsible for internal controls. The interface between the structures and the institutions are basically 3 or 4. One is the Ward Climate Change Planning Committee. So each ward has a planning committee that has both government and also communities in it. And they're expected to look at the projects and how they're being implemented and monitor the day-to-day implementation of the projects. Then we have the project of the projects within the county. Then we have the project management committee. These are responsible for the site level oversight. And then you have service contractors. So for the communities and the civil society, this is where we come in. The communities are responsible for identifying the needs and participating in the planning process, as well as tracking delivery and raising complaints and confirming whether the project is achieving what was intended to achieve. The civil society organization conducts social accountability. And at the moment, I know they're conducting selected few out of the many projects that we have in the country, because the funds, of course, are not enough. So the common challenges that we're experiencing in tracking, we see challenges in allocation versus disbursement. So we have a lot of information on the allocation, especially at the national level. But as the funds proceeds to the county level, visibility starts to diminish. And as it proceeds on to the project level, you are not even able to follow all the way to the project level. I know there are some CSOs who have required to ask for procurement documents, and some of that sometimes is not easy to come by. So that limited disclosure makes the information too complex for a citizen to struggle to know where actually the money is. Then the weak link between the money and the results. So of course we have the money report, but you also need to understand, is this money reaching the very outputs that it was intended to in terms of reducing vulnerability, and in this case, improving water access, drought resilience, and catchment and restoration. So some of these areas, if they receive these funds and we still are suffering from drought and flood, then there's still a lot to be desired. The budget coding, the difference between all the money that is development oriented and the climate fund, separating the two is not easy even for a common citizen, even for a CSO. The delayed reporting, sometimes you have money that has been dispersed in the budget, but then it hasn't reached to the implementation, and reconciling the two cycles becomes an issue. And of course, the procurement and transparency gaps around contracts, because the contractors mostly are formally contracted through the government systems, and therefore it's hard for a contractor to disclose some of the information that they have in actually their projects. So we have money that is not, the challenge is not just, money moving, but money should be able to move in a manner that is able to address the very challenge that it was designed for in the first place, which is realizing the actual resilience outcomes for communities. So from my end, I'll end with this message and started saying, publishing FLOCA information is good. However, it needs to be updated, because like projects, I think like the one I have summarized is for the financial year 2024-2025. So for this financial year, there's a gap. So there's a gap in it, and it will come maybe next year. And maybe making an intervention next year will actually be very late. So it's important that we have updated climate finance tracking information, and being able to follow the money from the budget, from the funder to the budget system, all the way to the disbursement to the project site. I think that is where there's a gap currently. And it's important that we follow the full chain of accountability. So information, allocation, releases, procurement from the national, county to the ward and site level is quite important. And lastly is to say that the fund is important, but also the process and the systems accompanying it should also be ring-fenced with the integrity that it requires, so that we deliver the actual results that we endeavor to achieve as far as climate is concerned. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Faith. Yeah, I mean, again, some really, points that maybe we've made before, or that, people are aware of, but that need to be emphasized. Particularly, I really like what you say, this disconnect between the money and the results. Not only is it a challenge to follow the money all the way down the chain, but that at the end of the day, where is the linkage or the lack of connection between the money and the actual results, and it should not be forgotten in this conversation. So thanks a lot for emphasizing that. We're going to move to our last panelist now. I'm going to pass to Abdul. So Abdul Malek, he is an associate professor in the Department of Geography and Environment at Jagannath University, Bangladesh, and the director of the Center for Climate, Society and Environment. He holds a PhD in human geography from the University of Wollongong, Australia, and has more than a decade of experience in research on climate change adaptation, human mobility, resilience, livelihoods, refugee studies, and the political economy of environmental change. So Abdul is going to speak a little bit to also a case study on the ground that we looked into late last year. Give a little bit more information around what were the kind of what was the objective of the case study, what kind of happened, and where does where does the effect of poor integrity actually hit communities, to illuminate how it can manifest in very real ways for some of the most vulnerable people on the planet when it comes to climate impact. So Abdul, I pass to you now. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon. Basically, today I'm going to share the findings from our integrity focused assessment of a water-related climate adaptation project in Bangladesh, especially in coastal Bangladesh, the gender responsive coastal adaptation project. The story, I can say the water tank that never came. I would like to take you to a small village, coastal village in Satkhira that is near the Sundarbans. Every day, the women of this village walk long distance to collect drinking water. After cyclones and saltwater intrusions, ponds become salty, canals become unsafe, and the clean water becomes more precarious than rice here. Among these women, the Rahima, a widow, landless, and one of the poorest people in this village. When the gender responsive coastal adaptation project arrived, the people were hopeful. Survey team visited homes, asked about income, land, and the vulnerability, and marked households that would receive rainwater harvesting tanks. Rahima's name was in the primary list, in the beneficiary list also. And for the first time in years, she believed that she and her children, grandchildren would have safe drinking water. And the promise, the project worker explained that the tanks are funded through the International Climate Finance, the Green Climate Fund. And the project basically started in 2019, and total budget is nearly 33 million USD. And the institutional architecture is complex. The GCF as a funder, including a small part, comes from the government. UNDP as accredited entity, Ministry of Water, Ministry of Women, Children, Women and Children Affairs of the executive entity, and youth forums and other NGOs as field implementer, and the DPHE, a Department of Public Health Engineering, is responsible for the operation and maintenance. So the and the materials would be provided free of cost. The promise was like this. And women gathered for meetings, discussed installation sites, and felt that the government and international agencies had finally noticed them. And one beneficiary letter said, yes, they did proper verification. The ones who received it are truly helpless. And Rohima waited patiently. No surprise, months later, tanks began arriving in this village. One household received a tank, then another, but not Rohima. She went to ask what had happened, but the answer shocked her. The water tank that was supposed to come in my name was taken by others. And so, people whisper different explanations. Some say that another vulnerable widow had received it temporarily, whose husband killed by the tiger in Sundarbans during harvesting forest resources. And others say Rohima could not pay the unofficials, the officials 3,000 BDT that local intermediaries or the local agencies are demanding for the ownership. But no official record explained the changes. No one could tell her why her name disappeared from the final list. And a bigger problem, as our research continued in Gabura and Burigwalan unions of Shamnagar, we discovered that the Rohima's story was not an isolated incident. Many beneficiaries paid hidden costs that was not mentioned, like 500 BDT to transport a water tank, because that was the remotest study area, remotest beneficiary area for this project. For 2,000 BDT for moving bricks, sand, and cement for like installation of the tank. And some need to pay 700 to 1,000 BDT for labor cost if they were too old or sick to carry materials themselves. So one woman told us they brought the team to the road junction and told us to carry it home. Those who could not carry it had to pay someone else. So on paper, the project promised free installation, In reality, poor households are paying with money, labor, and physical effort in some case. So the confusion, then another question emerged. When a system broke, who was responsible? Was it UNDP? Was it DPET? Was it the NGO Forum? Was it the Union Parishad? So even the government officials gave different answers. Beneficiaries did not know who to call. Some systems stopped working within days, especially the community-based rainwater harvesting system. And yet complaints remained unresolved because there was no clear grievance mechanism. Maybe there is a clear grievance mechanism in the paper, definitely, but in reality. And during one interview, we found a project staff member looked genuinely distressed that if you raise expectations and cannot fulfill them, that is a crime. So that sentence stayed with me because this project was not only about technology, it was about trust. And when a widow sees a survey team at her door, she feels recognized. When her name appears on a beneficiary list, she feels included. And when the promised water tank never arrives, the disappointment is not merely technical, it is also deeply emotional. So our study found three important lessons. The first, targeting the vulnerable is not enough. Project must ensure that landlessness, inability to pay, or missing a survey round do not become barriers to access. Because they said, okay, we are going to offer the rainwater harvesting tanks for people, those who are really poor, those who are really economically marginalized. But you say the criteria you have to be, you should have land. But the socioeconomically marginalized people or the ultra poor people, those who have not land to install this tank. So there is a gap. And the second is the transparency must reach the village level, on the local level. Budget, beneficiary list, so the contract information and the maintenance responsibilities should be publicly displayed, or communities know their rights. And third is the accountability must be local. Without a functioning grievance system, small abuses become normal. Hidden costs become accepted for the people, those who know that, well, to get a water tank, its cost is like 40,000 to 45,000 BDT. But if I pay 3,000 or 4,000, it's nothing wrong. In some cases, people think it as they are gaining another 39,000 or 38,000 BTT, and the poorest remain silent. So at the end of our fieldwork, Vermeer still did not have the tank that had been allocated to her. So yet she was not asking for charity. She was asking for something much simpler. So if my name was on the list, why was I left out? The question captures the entire challenges of climate adaptation project. And climate finance can build tanks, pipes, and treatment plants, but unless it also builds the transparency, accountability, and trust, the people most vulnerable to climate change may remain vulnerable even after the millions of dollars have been spent. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Abdul. Yeah, it's I really like what you say, and I think it's a good lead into our first question, or first sort of set of questions, where you say accountability really has to happen on that local level, because you can have accountability at all the other levels, but if it gets to a certain level and those kinds of mechanisms or even principles aren't in place, then it can all kind of fall to pieces very easily when it comes to ensuring that someone who's promised something or who needs something actually gets what they need. So there, I think it's a very interesting question. The case that happened in Bangladesh and connected to the GCF, Karen, of and perhaps you can answer what are the sort of main challenges that the IIU actually faces in terms of integrity. I think this case is one of them, that you can have structures in place at the fund level, but then, when you get to the very, very local level, there's a lack of control in some sense. So what are the kind of main challenges that you're seeing?
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. I think just from the mere structure, or the governance structure and the way the fund has been set up, that is already a challenge in itself. What is really important to understand is that the GCF is what we sometimes refer to as second-line institutions, and that means that we do not directly implement projects, and we are also not in touch directly with our implementing partners. Instead, we work really through this network of accredited entities. And we are currently only based in Korea, so our headquarters are here outside of Seoul, and our accredited entities that implement and our executing entities and other delivery partners, they are in the field. The field is in Africa, in South America, in Asia, Southeast Asia, the Pacific, and so on. So it's very, very far away from us to really have this visibility on the ground. I think Faith was also referring to that in her presentation. That is probably one of the biggest challenges. The good news is the board of the GCF has just approved to establish regional offices at that last board meeting in March. So we will have the risk there is a little bit, or the challenge is a little bit reducing, because we will have in Africa 2 regional offices. We will have 1 regional offices in South America, 1 in the Middle East, and 1 as an outpost in the South Pacific on the Fiji Islands. So while it does not tremendously reduce the challenge that in terms of visibility, it definitely gets better. We will not just be anymore just in Korea. Another challenge is always the rising number of cases, which of course in summer is a good thing. It means that our reporting channels and also our capacity building efforts are working. You can see it like that. But and that entities have understood that there is a GCF exists, and you can bring suspected cases of fraud, corruption, and not only that, but also of suspected violations of indigenous people's rights or environmental and social standards. But of course, in order to address all of these cases appropriately and also respond to them, our integrity function needs to be appropriately resourced, and that's probably also the challenge. So dealing with the rising number of cases, which on the one hand may be a good thing, we become also more visible as a fund, then responding to that from an accountability mechanism point of view, that's definitely another core challenge. And then the third challenge I would like to describe as really seeing proactively the risks in the project that we fund, the rising number of projects, where do the risks lie, and how can we mitigate and prevent risk before they materialize into fraud and corruption. So keeping up really with technology in that respect, that's a key challenge also. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I think you make a really good point also about resourcing integrity work. If the fund is increasing so much at the project level, that also needs to be proportional from an integrity side of things, right?
The thing is, if I may add to that, yes. Everybody always wants higher standards of integrity, and everybody wants also accountability, but that requires resources. It requires financial resources, it requires human resources, and that's a real commitment that funders and partners need to understand. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much. I want to ask a question. One question is coming in. I think it's an interesting question for the Philippines case, but also Faith, I think from your side, it's something that you can answer in the Kenyan context. The question is, what role can civil society networks play to strengthen transparency in cases like that of the Philippines? Maybe you want to speak a little bit about if there was a role of civil society in that case particularly, or if not, where could they maybe come in? First, Ramon, let's maybe hear from the Philippines perspective.
Okay, civil society certainly has a role. Unfortunately, we don't have the laws that will allow them to participate. There has to be a consumer group, a third-party group, not only for flood control, but even for water supply and sanitation projects as well. Because right now, when it comes to water supply and sanitation, you have the operator and you might have the regulator. But in the Philippines, we don't have a consumer group that you might see, for example, in like a consumer voice in the UK. So there's space for that, a third party of consumers, of technically proficient, financial proficient consumers that can review contracts, that can also assess if the projects that were proposed are actually being implemented.
And Faith, what can you say from the Kenyan side of things? What's the role of CSOs in all of this, or civil society in all of this?
Thank you, Rebecca. The FLOCA design has created a structure for CSO. They have what you call a CSO engagement framework. And ideally, ideally, the framework is expected that the CSOs will be playing their complementary role, especially in the implementation, in tracking the finance, as well as in giving feedback in what is actually happening around the community. But what I've seen as a challenge, they do not have the financial muscle that the system has, and as a result, their work is, let me call it, significantly compromised in relation to the role that they should actually be playing. And when you find yourself being financed by the very system that you're supposed to check, then there is a bloodline around the results and the output that you can give, because it is that system that determines when you can meet. It is that system that determines what you can say. And in a way, then you find yourself kind of in a gray line. However, there is opportunity within the public participation process, because you've said the funds flow through the public processes, and therefore the civil society and the community should engage in the public participation process in the budgeting priorities, and also be able to do what we call a citizen-generated data or reports. It's expected that by the time the FLOCA projects end in this particular cycle next year, we should also have our own report that says what we saw and what we felt and what we found out. I know when we tried to do one last year, the governance and progress report, which we actually led in it, we also found ourselves in some gray places where you find some doors shut because you called out an issue or you called out someone. So there's also that risk on this other side of whistleblowing. Whistleblowing and using the media as a partner. Sometimes the media as a partner is a good one to be able to amplify what is actually happening, so that you can create attention to what is going on. So closer partnership with the media has something, you can see that is something that bears fruit. And of course, the last resort is litigation. It's expensive, but it happens. I know Rafik is here from Nakuru County, and he has made a comment what they're doing in Nakuru County as far as pursuing litigation for such cases. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to also just mention, I mean, I think there's a couple other colleagues from Kenya who are in the session now. Jane, for example, from SASPAD, if you want to also write a little bit about what your role as a CSO, what's the kind of work that you've been undertaking to also link communities with governments. If you want to share a little bit more information in the chat and any links to your work, please, you're more than welcome. Faith, I think you make a really good point, not only because being financed by certain entities that you might be at one point investigating, but also, again, that there's just not enough resources. So related to that, a question coming from Virginia is, can the panelists expand on the additional costs required for effective accountability, or maybe what percentage of overall costs should be expected to be spent on accountability? Karen, I don't know if you have some kind of indication of what that looks like.
It's basically what I just said, that organizations and funders see that accountability functions in the organizations, which is, by the way, it's not just integrity functions or redress functions, but it would also be functions like internal audit, these kind of, as I said, that they really look, or this monitoring and evaluation and learning. This is a new division that we have at the GCF, that they are given the resources and that they are adequately staffed, and that there's also continuous training on this. The exact cost of this, no, I think one needs to apply principles on what is what is the size of an organization, what is the project size, what needs to look into. And my personal opinion, there's probably never enough of this.
Yeah. Okay. An interesting question also coming about e-procurement. I know in Bangladesh there is some kind of e-procurement system already in place. So maybe a question to both Ramon and Abdul. Abdul, if you wanted to comment on, what you might know about that e-procurement system and if it's actually working in practice, or maybe what are some of the gaps that you're seeing there. And then Ramon, to you, has such an approach been implemented as a result of what happened in the Philippines? Is it under discussion? Was it already there and it's just not working? Those are some questions related to this particular mechanism. But maybe Abdul, let's start with you if you wanted to say anything about the current e-procurement system in Bangladesh.
Thank you. I think, Bangladesh has introduced e-procurement system, but my experience says that it's not work properly. I had the experience, even in the case of my university. And in that time, I was the part of the administration, and I found that as a e-tender, only we found one people dropped e-tender for a work, and the dropper, like who dropped the tender, their budget is exactly the same what we estimated, like our university estimated, and it's really so it's clearly thing that's it's really a surprising issues that how the estimation and the like bidders estimation is same exactly, and how only one people drop the tender while the online portal is open for every people. So definitely there are some issues. I think also I don't have much deep idea, but definitely we found some issues and we just canceled the bid. So whatever it is, e-tender or e-procurement, but if the system is not working or the people have different intention, then definitely the system is not work.
Hi. So in the Philippines, we do have an e-procurement system, but it refers, it's applied mostly to products and services, not to large-scale infrastructure projects. So there are certainly gaps in that sector, and that's something that certainly has to be addressed. One of the things I'm actually working on with Asian Development Bank is to put up a benchmarking system for all the water utilities in the country. While it's looking at the KPIs, one of the discussions we have right now is to look even beyond that. For example, how much did a utility, for example, procure its meters? Or how much did it how much did it cost per kilometer for a transmission, or how much they spend on water treatment? And if we can get to that level of detail, then we can hopefully curb some of the corruption that's coming off the ground, because we're going to have better industry standards, and we can be able to see which meters, for example, are more costly in other utilities than it is in another town's utilities. So hopefully we get to that point.
Okay. Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, hopefully. That's the plan.
Yeah.
Even in Bangladesh at this moment, the last rules and regulation for procurement release, even if we purchase, like if you spend government money for the government money, it's $4,000 or $3,000. Even you need to go through the e-tender process, but we don't know what's happened actually, where only one people drop the tender or only two people drop the tender while the portal is open for every person. That's a huge.
Yeah, absolutely. There was an interesting conversation that was happening a little bit earlier in the discussion, that of maladaptation. So sort of, is it a useful term? Is it something that helps us, hinders us? Maybe a question for Martin, also from a water and climate perspective. Do you think the emphasis on maladaptation, because we also speak about it quite a lot at WIN, do you think this emphasis on maladaptation is misplaced and kind of slowing or preventing needed interventions? Or how can we balance, people understanding the risk of maladaptation, but also the need to kind of speed things up and not to create some kind of barrier or fear of acting and actually putting the resources to what's needed. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I think I'd still say that maladaptation is an important term because, as we said, and as we also heard from the case example in the Philippines, it's not just a failed adaptation project; it's actually doing harm, like actual harm. And I think that's still a fact that we need to consider. So I'd say the term has its right to exist. But I also do get the point that if we say, I think it was Jose who raised the point that we are not talking about malmitigation or maldevelopment. So that is a good point, but maybe we should also ask us why are we not talking about this? Why is it especially maladaptation? And I do not have a clear answer to that because there are pros and cons. I see that point. But nevertheless, I think we shouldn't stop talking about it, because if we just label every case of maladaptation due to corruption as a failed project, I mean, a project can fail due to a lot of reasons. We were focusing on corruption today, but there are many reasons for a project to not work properly or as intended. May it be bad project design, may it be unforeseen circumstances, may it be instability. So this would group them all together. I don't think that's the right way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's something about the term that speaks to the complexity of maladaptation, right? Malmitigation is just, it's mitigation that didn't happen at the end of the day, because I guess mitigation either happens or it doesn't happen, but adaptation has so many layers of complexity, it can be partially done, whatever. So I think it's a term that maybe speaks to the challenge at hand in terms of achieving adaptation and what can go wrong in the process. But I tend to agree with what you said. I will ask Karen now. There was an interesting question. Is GCF using results-based funding at all? Does it show, and if so, does it show benefits in reducing corruption risks?
Okay, thank you. So the fund for the project that it funds does not. We have an integrated results-based management framework that we have, and that's also rather new. So we look at the output of projects and whether they deliver the desired impact. Results-based payments and funding, in my knowledge, only happens in the REDD+ context. This is that project under the UNFCCC, and for those of you who don't know, REDD+ stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation, and that is the activities under this entire program that allow countries to receive results-based payment for verified emission reductions and so on. This is creating thereby financial incentives. But for the project at the GCF, no, we pay according to milestones delivered, but it's not based on results.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. I'm trying my best to get through all the questions, so sorry if I'm breezing through a little bit. We have a lot of questions coming in, which is really great, so I'm just trying to get them answered as much as possible. There's an interesting question that has come in. It's also quite complex, so maybe, I don't know who wants to take it. Not an easy answer. It's coming from Danny. And she's asking, how do you balance the need for on one hand, kind of stringent procedural requirements for improved integrity, and on the other hand, this increasingly complex pathways to accessing or dispersing or implementing climate finance? So how do you think we can strike that balance? I don't know who wants to maybe take a stab at answering. Karen, yeah.
So we are actually experiencing that a bit firsthand. We have standard conditions at the GCF that we expect every fund recipient, so every party that receives funds from us to meet. How do we make sure that it's still a project that a fund recipient really can implement without being overburdened by these standard conditions? It's really by making the standard conditions very, very straightforward and really bring it down to the core minimum standards. That's a big challenge, especially for persons like me working in the integrity field and accountability field. We always want the world standards of integrity principles, but the key is really to ensure that every fund recipient, every party, accredited entities in our case, or delivery partner, can meet these standards. And that means bringing down these standards, making them less complex, and really boil it down to the core minimum standards. That's a key for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to weigh in on this particular question? Yeah, Ramon.
Mm-hmm. Hi. I actually just last year I went through an intense process of preparing project concept notes for the Green Climate Fund, which is actually very complicated, but it also allowed me to really think through the project. It required us to go through and identify really who the beneficiaries are and how the project would be implemented. So while it might have been a little tedious and complicated, it really provided us some insights on the process, and it was a learning process as well. So it might have been tedious, but I am sure that the outcomes were better thought out, and as a result, I'm sure whatever comes out of the project is going to be well worked out in the process.
Yeah, very good point. There's a question also on accreditation. So only a few CSOs are getting accredited. Does this mean that developments are only real opportunities? Essentially, okay, trying to understand what exactly the question is. How can communities be the driver of choices on what is needed and how to do it when they might not be, at that accredited entity level or at a high enough level where they can be accessing climate finance more easily? Where is that role for communities to still be the drivers of those decisions? I know that speaks a little bit specifically to the GCF structure of working through accredited entities, but I think maybe it's also a question for Faith, on the FLOCA project of how is it that the role of communities as the drivers of the decisions can actually be built into a project from the beginning.
Rebecca, you want to respond?
The question is really, I mean, when it's a challenging landscape for very small CSOs or community-based organizations, or if they're working at a lower level, how is it that, if they themselves are not able to access climate finance because of the structures that are in place, because they don't have the right accreditation or whatever it may be, how can they still be the drivers of the decisions on what gets implemented in their own communities?
I think I read that question, and it comes from Kenya, largely, about the NDA and the letter of no objection and all that. Yeah, for a while, I think the CSOs, let me just say, Karen, now you have opened the window for CSOs to be accredited. I think I had that update about a year ago or a few months ago. And that means that we have opportunity to be able to come together as CSOs in Kenya to be able to work in alliance. I know civil society largely will have to work alone because it makes sense for us, but the climate finance terrain tells us we have to work together. So I think it's important that we join the alliances both at the county level and also at the national level, so that we create a bigger muscle in terms of our capacities, so that we can apply for these funds as unified entities as opposed to a single entity. I want to believe a single entity for the GCF might not come through. But if we work together through an alliance or through collaboration, then we can be able to ask for the letter of accreditation, and then we are clear about our roles with each other. And then when we implement, we also implement at bigger and at scale. However, I know we also need to have a discussion with the Treasury so that they released the process for letter of no objection the other day, and I think it's in the public. That process is right now has been made public. So let's familiarize ourselves with it because it's public, and let's make use of each other for this process. Thank you.
Thanks, Faith. Yeah, I think there's an important point in the way that the FLOCA program was structured as well, where on paper the communities were the ones deciding which projects they wanted to implement in their own localities. So I think that's the start. But of course, there's so much that comes after that in terms of the structures in place and those that fulfill that objective in practice that needs to be carried through an entire project. And we can see with FLOCA, sometimes that has worked, but when those principles haven't been respected or resourced correctly, then that can very easily fall to the wayside. So as much as it's about ensuring that on paper, from the beginning of a project, carrying through is where it really matters, of course. We're at time, unfortunately. That went quicker than I thought it would. At least I imagine we would be able to answer most of the questions. It seems there are some outstanding ones. What I would like to do is compile all of the questions that didn't get answered and send them to the panelists, maybe to be able to respond to a few more of these. So if you'd like, we can do that. I'd like to share there are a couple of resources that WIN has worked on recently to respond to some of these challenges, which you can find on our website. One guide for local governments on how to implement climate adaptation projects with integrity. Another report coming from some of the work that we've recently done with Faith and some other colleagues in Kenya, looking at climate finance tracking in the country and how that is actually happening, from national government all the way down to communities. One last thank you to all the panelists for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your inputs. It was very interesting, and I wish you all a great day, and keep doing the work that matters. Thanks a lot.